Hi, my name is Stephanie, and I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar today, Strategic Business Value with CMDB. Just a few quick notes before we start. Your phone lines are muted, so if you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A panel. Please send them to all presenters. I am recording the event today, so you will receive an email no later than tomorrow, and it will have a link for this recording as well as a link to download the slides. Lastly, later on in our webinar, Jeff will be doing a demo. So if you want to find the full screen mode now, that will make it much easier for you to see that demo when Jeff is in the portal. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen. Don?
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon. I'm Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen. I should advance the slide. There we go. And joining me today is my normal co-host, Jeff Benedict, who heads up our service management practices and leads our innovation efforts. If you're new to our webinar series, welcome. And if you're a past attendee, thanks for joining us again. Our goal is always to share valuable information and insights that you can use in your planning and your activities right now. The topic we're going to talk about today is strategic business value with CMDB. After a very little bit about Evergreen, we'll dive into that. And beyond that, we'll briefly demonstrate some of the configuration concepts we're going to be discussing in our always evolving view of a very advanced self-service portal and catalog kind of experience built on ServiceNow. Then we'll answer questions if you have any. Evergreen is a US-based consulting firm, and we've worked with hundreds of mid-market, Fortune 1000 companies, and public sector organizations to improve their IT service management execution. Over the past 20 years, we've delivered more than 4,000 ITSM projects. We are a full lifecycle firm, meaning we have both process and technology consulting in the same company. We are one of a few top-tier or gold US ServiceNow partners in services, applications development, and training. As a certified applications developer, we develop solutions on the platform which are built and tested to the same standards as ServiceNow themselves. We believe the benefit to our customers is higher quality. As we talk with our customers in ServiceNow, they tell us that this is their biggest problem, meeting demand. They say it exceeds resources, but it can have peaks and valleys as well. Skilled resources are scarce. It takes 6 to 9 months to become capable, and then they might get hired away. Also, a common thing I hear is that a customer tells us we may not have a true solution architect to lead us, so we might be doing the wrong things. And when our people need help, where can they turn? Last, even with consultants, which can be expensive like Evergreen, contracts, task orders, and invoicing are still a lot of work. And once we work with a consulting firm, we educate them on our business, and the project ends, and they're gone, so we lose that connection. This is how most of our customers try to handle this traditional services model. A core internal ServiceNow team, augmented by outside consultants on a project-by-project basis with possible offshore technical support. As we looked at this, we realized that we were so used to doing it this way, we don't ever really stop to think how hard and inefficient this actually is and how much time it wastes. We think that traditional service approach is broken. We designed a new kind of service, which we call Evergreen Evolve, for ServiceNow specifically to fix those problems. There's a huge amount of waste in project-based activity that neither of us benefit from. Due to scheduling issues that we have, it's hard for us to get billable resources usable more than 70 to 75% of the time, so 25% gets wasted. We also have a saying in consulting, the first project with the correct scope is the second one. Now everyone chuckles when they hear this, because we know it's true. So another 15 to 20% gets lost in risk allowance to account for those scope issues, for an astounding total of 40 or 45% that gets wasted. This is why consulting service rates are so high and why there's so much frustration between customers and service providers. Evergreen Evolve is a part to full-time team of senior-only implementation certified ServiceNow experts, individually dedicated to you over a 6-month period. So our team and your team become one team. You get dedicated U.S. thought leadership in our engagement managers and senior solutions architects who work closely with our offshore team of dedicated, certified developers. Evolve can give you one flexible contract to help you meet as much of both your tactical and strategic ServiceNow demand as you'd like. Because it captures the huge amount of waste, we can pass the savings on to you. Best of all, there's no long-term lock-in. You can always cancel it with 30 days notice. So let's dive into our topic for the day. As we often do, covering a few idle definitions is useful for getting us grounded on the same page. 4 are relevant today: service owner, configuration item, configuration management, and CMDB. Excuse me. The service owner manages one or more specific services over their entire life cycle. Most companies I work with don't have designated service owners when we start working together. And ones that do, very rarely do they take an end-to-end lifecycle view of the service. A configuration item, or CI, is a managed component. It's not just technology. It can be a process, documentation, or even a person. It's anything we want to track, account for, and manage over time so we can use it. Configuration management is a process, that's the key, that maintains accurate information about things that are used to deliver IT services. Isn't that interesting? Clearly, the whole point of it is to deliver an IT service. The natural extension is that we need to know we can rely on those things to be ready and right when we need them. CMDB is simply a place where we store this data over time and how it relates to other data or other CIs. So why has CMDB failed? The reasons are important if we don't want to make the same mistakes again. The biggest reason by far is it was a solution in search of a problem. As we often see in IT, we're really good at doing things. We tackle big complex things and wrestle them to the ground in a large-scale way. But we aren't really good at asking why or how this will be used. Does that make sense? And what is the least we can do rather than the most? Even though ITIL defined CMDB, there weren't really any best practices for how to succeed with the CMDB, so we were on our own. The amount of detail we began to capture was massive, and we got lost in it. Then, as we involved others in the effort, since we didn't know why we were collecting the data, we lacked purpose, which we could share with them to help us all do the same thing. At the heart of it, if we don't truly understand how to build and deliver services, then how could we make sense out of a CMDB? Since its whole purpose is to enable the delivery of services. It's also fair to say that there was plenty of devil in the detail. Data sources were all over the map, inconsistent, inaccurate, duplicative, and contradictory. Our big bang approach to collecting and storing all the data didn't really help either. Last, I do think it's fair to say that manually maintained CMDBs, at other than the highest, most simple levels, are not sustainable and shift constantly in a virtualized cloud future world. Without really good application discovery technology, it's not really very viable. So what's different now? Innovative IT organizations are truly beginning to understand that their value is in delivering what the customer needs and wants in a high-quality experience that meets the customer's expectations end to end. But they don't actually have to provide the technology solution themselves because the customer doesn't care who provides it. They only care about getting the functionality they need to do their jobs. This in turn is leading IT to focus on delivering services, true services, rather than just these siloed technical outcomes, which is fueling the emergence of the role of the service owner. Someone who owns the outcome the customer really wants from end to end. And whether we or outside partners provide part or all of any given service, we are still responsible for creating and delivering quality outcomes end to end. Without accurate and timely configuration management data, it is simply not possible. There's quite a bit of difference between the roles of a technical manager and a service owner. This slide is a bit of a simplification, but it isn't incorrect. You can see that as a service owner, you have many more questions you need answers to. These questions arise when we see the service from the customer's eyes. Notice the bold blue items. These are questions where accurate configuration management helps the service owner, and it's over 80% of them. The differences now make the CMDB really truly essential. Here are 7 foundational things that only the CMDB can bring to the delivery of IT services. Modular and reusable, end-to-end, variable service offerings, true cost of service, KPIs the customer cares about, thinking globally and acting locally, and top-to-bottom visibility. We're going to take a look at each one of these briefly. We want to build modular services and manage them as configuration items. It's important to apply a building block mentality to constructing services, then combine the blocks to create new services and variations of existing ones. If all of your services are single-threaded and custom-built, they will be very expensive to create, impossible to maintain, and confusing to your customer. Think about Amazon. What would it be like if every Amazon department, and there are hundreds of them, had its own checkout procedure? But this idea has its own challenges too. Each service module, let's say financial approval process, could be used in hundreds of services. So service configuration management is mandatory, with each service being managed as configuration item and mapped into any combined services of which it is a part. Now we're going to take a look at how this can enable end-to-end service delivery and ownership. Every service we deliver is made up of a lot of little services. And even though one person, let's say someone named John Smith, owns the big service, there are lots of little services being combined from different parts of IT to make up the big service. This is part of what scares John because he doesn't control those people. They don't actually work for him. So how can he possibly be successful? As the service owner, he begins explaining to everyone delivering services to him how important they are, how they fit into the big scheme, and what the customer really wants. John creates meaningful mission alignment because just mechanically doing a task is not very emotionally fulfilling, but helping a customer as part of a team, that is. And every day, John will work with everyone, giving feedback, helping them improve, streamlining, encouraging the effort, and making sure they see their part in the big picture. How does the CMDB help John? It provides the detail in each sub-service: availability, time to provision, quality of service, service issue resolution, and service outage restoration that allow John to see his service end-to-end, fix it when it's broken, and continually improve it for his customer. As we move up the maturity scale in service offering creation, we're now able to offer variable service offerings, allowing the customer flexibility to select a variant of a service that best meets their particular cost and benefit mix. While not every service has this flexibility, for example, there might only be one version of SAP, the CMDB with the CI service components allows us to see which service combinations can be created to yield variable service offerings and which cannot. Beyond that, it gives us the ability to safely and accurately evolve and maintain these service variants over time. Most IT organizations are at a pretty low maturity level when it comes to IT costing. This prevents IT from driving customer choice or participating in the fundamental conversation of business very well, which is the cost-benefit trade-off conversation. As we move to IT services, IT organizations are beginning to see this as mandatory rather than nice to have. Whether we actually get cost reimbursement or just do show-back costing, which is a lot easier, it still significantly affects consumer behavior as most people don't want to waste money. It's pretty well wired into us, thus enabling better customer understanding and decision making. This can lead us to create standard service offerings with different prices, perhaps from low to high, giving the customer choices they need to spend effectively. The CMDB, we can't do that without it. What do customers care about? They only care about two things: a great customer experience and meeting our commitments for delivery and service performance and availability. These two customer KPIs are at the top of the pyramid and cascade down to the service owner and then to the service providers. KPIs become SLAs, and SLAs flow down to OLAs as we go down the pyramid. And all the OLAs roll up into the SLAs, and they roll up and deliver the KPIs. Then, working as a team, we continuously seek to improve our service delivery as well as the measures of our success, which can be helped by visible alignment with the customer. With the CMDB enabling modular, reusable subservices, we can even trial build a prospective service, a service that we might want to offer, and look at what the performance and delivery might look like end-to-end by adding up the SLAs and OLAs around the delivery times and the performance, and even look at the cost. Creating and enforcing global standards and governance are really tough challenges. The CMDB can help us think globally and act locally. Here's an example. While we may have a global standard for email, it may require some modification to work well in Germany, Japan, Brazil, or Sweden. Even though it may be 80, 90, even 90% the same, global organizations often fight it because it can dramatically increase complexity. This leads to organizational battles and potentially poor fit for its use at the local level. With CMDB, we can work in a modular fashion and use 80% of the core offering per the corporate standard, then create the few specific modifications or components needed to meet the localized needs. We still have a viable corporate standard and we meet the local need, a true win-win, which is made possible by effective configuration management. A lot of what we traditionally did in the CMDB was below the double blue line in the middle, the hardware and software technology components and their relationships to each other. For our purposes today, I'm calling this the discoverable infrastructure. Above the line are the services. A service usually consists of people, processes, descriptions, functionality, options, and service commitments, as well as technology underpinnings. Much of what makes up a service CI can't be discovered. But that may not be a huge problem, because a service isn't as hard to track as moving technology like a virtualized server. You can see that each orange service above is consumed by some customer. That customer may be another service, or it may be an actual end customer. It doesn't really matter. One of our general principles is everyone has customers and everyone has services. It is relatively easy as a service owner to add and track consumers or customers of your service, as well as adding or tracking the sub-services that you consume to deliver your service. This can make it very easy to discover your services map up in the non-discoverable infrastructure area in the CMDB above the double line. The coolest part, because of that process, it's always accurate. So we can dig a little deeper into that, and here's a simple flow diagram showing adding customers and adding sub-services. As a service owner, I get requests from potential new customers to be consumers of my service. These may be end customers, or perhaps another provider who will use my service as a sub-service in their delivery. When I accept this request, the new customer is added to my active customers in configuration management, so I know at all times who is consuming my service. The same is true if someone requests removal of service. Configuration management is updated. As a service owner, I can also see other services by other providers in the CMDB. Let's say I find one that I think will add value to my service. I can request access as a customer to this service, which becomes a sub-service or a supporting service to my service. At the same time, the sub-service provider has a new customer, me. So here are some best practice keys for success in configuration management. First, let's recognize that the term CMDB might be viewed as bad. Perhaps use the term configuration management instead, because you might need a fresh term where you can define it for the organization and it doesn't carry a pre-labeled negative connotation. Promote the idea of fresh thinking. Accept that your past experiences are valuable lessons you've learned, and you can use them to your benefit and not repeat the mistakes from the past. Promote the strategic business value of the CMDB as we've talked about today. You will be experimenting with some new ideas and concepts, so keep it safe for learning. Begin with 3 or 4 important services and call it a pilot. People like pilots because they are experiments, they're fun, and it is safe to take risks in a pilot. This will make it much easier to get effective participation, plus you'll learn a great deal in the process. Last one here, think modular. Create CIs and use your change management process for linking. Begin to share this way of thinking. I know it's kind of new and it's a little different. Look for opportunities to highlight successes in the thinking. A CMDB is going to have data from lots of places because we always want the golden source, or that source which is the most current and accurate for any given set of data. So by definition, we are going to be federating. So we do need to build a high-level, flexible design and data model architecture for the CMDB from the beginning. Assign service owners, just to get a feel for the pieces that make up a service and the expectations around delivery. Identify the sub-service owners or managers and include them. A good place to start is with the 3 to 4 piloted services that we've chosen. This is critical. If you don't do so, no one will start to think like a service owner, so there won't be anyone who's testing the configuration data in daily use from the top down. For the pilot services, map the pieces at a high level, from the service to the sub-services to a high level of the discovered infrastructure supporting them. But don't get lost in the noise much below that as you get started, because you can go way down. Very important, at each level define only the barest minimum, not the maximum, amount of data that is absolutely necessary for management of the service. Less is more, and you can always add to it if necessary down the road. Last but not least, create a service owner's workspace, a place where the service owner can come to do their work every day and interact with their customers and the sub-service providers, both reactively and proactively. It can make people more comfortable with taking on the role of service owner. Here's a quick look at the service owner's workspace we provide in our solution out of the box. Today, it includes information on customer satisfaction, service quality, service availability, and service delivery, as well as a lot of other things. We are constantly adding to it and working on more and more proactive measures. Okay, so that's all we have today to cover for the presentation. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, and he's going to demonstrate some of these concepts in action in ServiceNow.
Thank you, Don. So in my demo today, I'm going to start with kind of showing a little bit about some of the outputs and benefits of where some of the CMDB, notably some of the relationships of your configuration items to the services they support and kind of how that benefits our customers. After that, I will show a little bit about kind of how we can establish some of those relationships. So I'm going to start here kind of this is our consumer perspective. So this is the self-service portal. This is built on the service portal application of ServiceNow. And this is where our consumers can come to get information about what our services are. They can submit requests, track those requests. I also like to highlight that this is a nice vehicle where we can communicate to our consumers, publish events, publish alerts, things that might impact their job function. An example of that you'll see on the home page here. We've got a service health area, right, which is related to some of the services we provide and their health. And so some of the things that I can be alerted to as a consumer is whether or not particular services I might rely on for my job function are currently impacted or degraded, or throwing some sort of event that impacts my ability to perform my job functions. So, for example, if I were leveraging the bond trading service, this might deflect might answer my question as to why it's not working properly today. Notice I can also kind of opt to be notified of any changes to this particular outage, or if there are also new outages that occur for this service, I can be alerted to that as well. So I can be kept apprised as to how it's performing for my purposes. So I'm going to show kind of where, let me just quickly show kind of how those outages would kind of be bubbled up. So I'm going to create a new one, kind of from a lower level down mentioned kind of the discovered infrastructure. So I'm going to create, in essence, an outage from a lower infrastructure component and trying to show how it impacts, the upstream components. All right, so I've got a particular Windows server that I could say is basically having some sort of issue, and just to show quickly kind of how it's related up through the infrastructure to our services. At the bottom here is that particular server, has a couple applications running on it that support underlying identity management service, which is consumed by some other various services throughout our organization. All right, so obviously this becomes a relatively critical server that's running applications that impact some services that our consumers would be expecting to continue to function. So I can say, server is not functioning. Just be really vague here in my description, if I can spell today. And I'm going to say create an outage. And this take me to an outage screen here momentarily. I'm going to basically just duplicate the messages at this point. I'll just throw this at the same. I'm going to say the outage began immediately at this point. Now what's going to happen here, and I'll show you this in a moment once it comes back, is that I created a single outage record, but yet on my incident record you'll now see there's 17 out here. Now the reason for this is it's going up through that tree, basically finding all the impacted services, all the impacted service offerings, and in essence broadcasting outages for all the upstream impacts that it has. Now the reason why this is happening is so that there's individual tracking for those individual services, as well as some of the commitments that might be defined on a service level related to their availability and their health. Now just to kind of highlight this further, right, so if I go into this and let's say I come to find out that this actually occurred at 8 a.m. this morning, it didn't happen immediately, and I adjust this to say this actual outage has been going on now for about 4 hours, in my time that is. You'll notice that all of these kind of share that same information. They're basically a synchronized set of outages. Now, if I go back to kind of the portal here for a second, right, one of the outages or one of the outputs of this is now we are showing to all the various service consumers all the services that have been made out in an outage situation. The other kind of interesting thing that we are doing with this is that I happen to be the service owner for one of these services. So one of the things that happens for me is that I actually get this kind of pending approval over here related to this outage. And really what the purpose of this is for me to, if I want to, kind of communicate this particular outage as an announcement to my customers. Right, and so one of the things that this is allowing me to do is to say, from an announcement perspective, how do I want to communicate this to my target customers? So maybe knowing that this is customer facing, maybe I want to put this in more customer helpful terms. Say it's currently down to some infrastructure issue. Maybe I'm optimistic in saying something like, will be restored by the end of business today. All right, so I'm going to be optimistic and, in essence, adjust my message. Now, when I approve this, one of the things that this is going to do is, in essence, publish an announcement that is then going to be shared in our portal here to our customers that are subscribed to this Workday service. All right, so as a new consumer of Workday, I can come to the portal, immediately see the message that the service owner myself has just kind of authored and communicated. Right, some of the additional details can be seen here. And then when I do view details, it's going to basically take me to that same kind of outage-based page. Now, consumers can also, once they've acknowledged this, they can also kind of confirm that announcement and kind of hide that. So basically a communication mechanism to our customers that that particular service is currently down. Right. Another thing I want to hit on here is, as going on that same level of me being as the service owner, I can go, and Don mentioned this, the service owner's kind of workspace. Let me show you kind of what that looks like here. And so as the kind of service owner, right, so a couple things I can do in my workspace is, one, I can track and manage some of the activities that are currently happening around my particular service, right, active incidents, how well they're progressing to some of our targeted communication or offer-based commitments. I can track some of the trends in terms of how these flow of activities have been performing. Do the same thing for some of our active service requests and whether or not they're being delivered within those kind of target delivery dates, and same thing in terms of history. Right. The other thing, and this is where some of the CMDB comes into play, right? As a service kind of owner, I can look at kind of the health of my service, but also the health of my dependent components. Right. So here's a case where I can see here's that particular server that I depend on. It had an outage, which then trickled up to our identity management service, which then impacts me. So I can kind of see that chain here, right? And then I'm kind of joined in on this, right? Because this outage impacts my commitment as a service owner around how I'm going to deliver my availability of my service to my consumers. And so I would obviously be vested in terms of making sure this sub-service works optimally to make sure I can meet and deliver to my targets. Just a couple of things on here, and I'll hit on more of this in a little bit, but also there's another kind of metric over here that I would care about, which is really our quality of service, and that can be kind of measured in terms of the feedback, or notably some of the negative feedback that you might receive in regards to the service, and these are some things that might be actionable for me to work on. Now, one thing I want to hit on here, in talking about, since today's topic is CMDB, you talk about these relationships, and I mentioned, or showed here kind of creating an outage for one of these and how it upstream impacts my service. Now, I have some control over this, and that's defined here in this outage definition or outage dependency definition kind of page. Now, the way this works is, first of all, I have some options here. I can say I want to have no impact. So if there's an outage to a component that is part of my relationship tree, it has no impact to the health of my service. The other thing I can do is treat incidents as service degradations. If we have high priority incidents created for that server, it's going to show my service as being degraded. And then I can build in some other lower level individual item dependencies. A couple of things I can do here. I've already done this on this one, but in essence I can do what's called grouping these items, which is to kind of define them as a cluster. And that in essence means that both of these pieces, both these applications would need to be reported as down in order for my service to be considered in a down or impacted state. And then lastly, you'll see I've got an item here I can mark as excluded, which means it would have no impact to my health of my service. So I have some control over how those things map. All right, so the other way I want to go on this is, so again, now highlighting that we have relationships and dependencies between the infrastructure layer and the services. I showed kind of incidents and outages. The other way I want to show this is kind of change. And so let me create a new change, just kind of following the same kind of model that I just had. Let's say, as a result of that outage, we realize there's something that needs to be changed on this particular server. Right, so I'm going to say maybe apply security patch to resolve underlying issue. All right, so here's my change I'm going to apply. I'll just say this is done by our software team. And then I want to schedule this. Conveniently for me, I want to schedule this on Friday after work. And I'll just do 2200. And I will say this completes on Saturday morning at 1 a.m. All right, so let me save that. Now, much like the incident and the outages, right? So it's going to leverage that relationship dependency tree that we had shown over here. And if I look at this, I'm also going to have my impacted CIs for this particular change. It's not just that particular server, but are also these services that depend on this particular component, right, or this infrastructure component. and just another subset, the specifically identified impacted services for this are kind of called out here. Now, one thing I want to call attention to is you'll notice that this particular one has this conflict status of in conflict. And if I go to the conflicts tab, we'll see that because this impacts my underlying service that I support Workday, it actually is being scheduled outside my agreed to schedule, a window of time of when I expect changes that impact my service to occur. It just happens that this particular schedule is on a weekly schedule of every Saturday from 1 to 4. I allow changes I've agreed to with my consumers that changes that impact Workday can occur during that kind of window. Right? So since this has upstream impacts, this actually should follow this rule or this particular schedule. Right? So one of the things that would kind of be expected here would be to adjust this to kind of fall within that window. Right? So if I adjust this to Saturday instead, say somehow I'm able to do this much quicker into an hour, notice now our conflicts have been resolved and we have no conflicts detected as part of this particular schedule change. Now I wanted to highlight this because I think as change managers or people working through change advisory board meetings, without the CMDB and the relationship impacts, chances are somebody who's making a lower level change to a component like a server or a database isn't likely to know what all the impacts are to the upstream services that depend on those, right? So this is where a case where leveraging a tool like ServiceNow and the CMDB and relationships can certainly add value to that planning and risk analysis kind of activity. All right, so a couple more things I'll do quickly on this, just to complete this particular kind of story here. Let me just move this thing along in the process to request approval. The first place it goes is to some technical approvers. I'll just approve them on their behalf. The only thing I wanted to highlight with this is, as I mentioned before, our impacted services are listed here. We've got these particular owners, myself included as one of the owners for this Workday service. And one thing you'll notice is that those names are now listed as approvers. So another thing we're kind of asking for as part of this process is since all of these services are impacted by this change, we also want these service owners to review and authorize this change so that it can be properly communicated, properly planned, and noted as a possible risk to the delivery of their underlying service. Move this thing out of the way for a second. One other thing to highlight here, just from a consumer perspective, right? So I showed kind of the health page. The other thing to highlight or note on this is that these planned activities are also kind of communicated and shown here as well, right? So what's coming in terms of impacts and scheduled downtime is also being outlined and communicated to these consumers. All right, so one other area I'm going to go a slightly different direction is kind of wanted to show show both a user subscribing to a service, kind of from a user or consumer perspective, but also I wanted to show kind of how a service can be subscribed to another service and kind of interrelated to each other. So I want to first show, let me go to one of our service pages here, go to cloud applications. So as a consumer, I can go to a service like our cloud PC service. Some of the things I can learn from this is what the service is. I can see if it's got different offerings. And Don mentioned in his slides kind of having, say, local differences on the service, right? An email service being offered in a different way to one country versus the other. And this would be a case where you would likely have an overall email service and then different offerings with those nuances or those differences for the regional kind of consumers, right? So in this case, I've got a particular cloud PC service, and really the offering differences here are based off of my needs. Do I need something that just has standard graphics versus kind of high performance graphics, and kind of help me make a decision based off of this. Some of the other things, some of the actions that I can perform in terms of making requests are outlined here on a Forms tab, an area where I can see some of the reviews and ratings that have been performed, and also see how well it's actually met some of its targets over a historical period of time. But in this case, I'm not an active consumer of this service, so one of the things I want to do from an action perspective is become a consumer. Right, so I get kind of a simple form here where I can choose from which of the offerings best matches my needs. I'll say this one, and then here are my particular requirements, right? And I can put those in here, submit my request, and then I can come track the progress of this particular request. In this case, the process is relatively streamlined in that it has a routing to the service owner to approve this first, and then it has some automation to add me to the application and the use of this service, and ultimately I'll have some sort of confirmation. So just to kind of move this thing along, I'll go to the service owner, Alice, who has this request to approve out here for my access. Right, so since she likes me, she will approve this. So it's noted as approved. All right, and then I'll just kind of show quickly how this thing progresses. Give me an eye on how if it's progressing properly. So this is the request from the kind of back-end perspective, and then the workflow behind this. And I do want to bring this up because I guess this highlights another kind of point that Don brought up, in that we have this request and access to a service, but it is kind of highlighted before that these services can be dependent on other services and kind of stack together. So one of the things you're going to see in this workflow in terms of this provisioning is there's a sub-workflow here that also calls another kind of reusable service component that is part of our identity management service. So in essence, got a reusable way of provisioning access to different applications in our setup here. All right, so Cloud PC is in essence leveraging a shared component, a shared service to provision the access to this particular application, and to some other unique things related to its own requirements and needs. But basically, my request for gaining access to the service leverages another identity management subservice and its own kind of workflow for adding users to applications. All right, and so then come to my identity management system, see I've got access to this Cloud PC service. I can launch that, test it out, make sure it's working like I would expect, kind of come back to the portal and say either, nope, something's not working right like I expected, or yes, everything is perfect and I love it and it's wonderful. Right, and then if I say all that, it is now complete. One of the things just to hit on with this too, just to tie the bow on this particular process, there also is a kind of some feedback facilitated or asked for from me as a new subscriber to this service, which is basically sent to me as a survey, which I can come in and provide. This is excellent. All right, so just to kind of tie that loop of I'm now been requested access to something, I'm now starting to use it, and I can also solicit some feedback from consumers to make sure it is indeed working like all would expect. Okay, so now on the other side of this coin, let me just show you quickly here. So as we highlighted before, the service owner's kind of workspace. For one thing, the service owners do get alerts of notices related to things like health, and as well as like new subscribers. They can kind of take them to their workspace to manage those things. So one other thing I wanted to highlight here, so I mentioned so the consumer becoming a subscriber to the service, that was kind of one workflow. The other thing is if I as a service owner want to add a new kind of component or underlying shared service component into my kind of solution set, I do have an option here as well, which is kind of this add shared service option. And what this is going to do is kind of provide me a sub-list of some of the services that are made as kind of components that can be used kind of as a sub-service component to another service. So for example, in this case, maybe what I need is a new website to host to my my consumers. Right? Some of my particular needs on this is I don't only need a certain amount of storage and a certain expectation around availability. And then my details here would be something like you need to host a website for my Cloud PC customers to track status, something like that. All right, so I can submit this request. And much like the consumer story, right, this submits as a request in a request workflow that gets routed to the service owner for approval. Right, and I'll show you kind of how this guy goes. Go to this request record. Right, so we got our source service, our subservice to be added, the offering to be added as part of this, routed to the service owner for approval. Once they approve it, and there's in essence, in this particular case, a simple task to set up this, this particular required service or kind of required dependency component. Right, and then once it's closed, the overall request is considered complete. All right, and then the output of this, if I go back to this kind of service, is that one thing you'll find or highlight here is now within my list of dependency components, not just identity management, but also Apache Web Hosting is now also linked as a dependent component to my service. Right, from a map view, just show you how that looks. Load. I'll show you this way too. So the outage dependency map should also show this here. All right, so it's listed as another kind of component. Try this map one more time, see if it loads this time. It does. All right, so a little small, but basically my service now has another leg to it, right, in terms of connecting to this particular subservice. So I think that was all I wanted to cover. So I hope this was helpful in terms of being able to see kind of where the CMDB can support, from both the relationship perspective, but can support kind of service-to-service relationship, how that can help a consumer, as well as kind of the infrastructure to the service relationship and how that can help make decisions both from a change and a health and impact perspective.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. So, if you found any of this interesting, here are some possible next steps. Maybe you're interested in the advanced service portal and catalog and service organizing platform that Jeff demonstrated for creating and delivering better IT services. It's inexpensive, and it is actually the most viewed and purchased app on the ServiceNow store. It is available as a fully functioning self-service demo. It's fun, it's easy to use, it's very intuitive. There are over 1,000 who have signed up for it, and you can get a login from our website. Just follow the banner ad that points to it, and you can be using it very quickly if you're interested in that. Perhaps you're interested in establishing a better service configuration management direction and roadmap. Maybe take a deeper look at our service configuration strategy and roadmap approach, and it delivers in a few weeks, aligns you strategically, gets everyone on the same page, and can help you avoid making costly mistakes down the road. Or last but not least, perhaps you're interested in a better way to meet your ongoing ServiceNow demand. Please check out on our website our entirely new way with Evergreen Evolve. So that's all we've got for presentation today, and we can open it up for questions if we have any.
We do have some, Don. The first question, which I think I'll start with you on, what is the Evergreen delivery model for implementing the Core 6 idle processes with ServiceNow?
Okay. The Core 6 idle processes. All right, well, maybe I'm one short, okay?
Or the Core 5.
Well, what I'm thinking is it might be the idle V3 conversation around the 5 stages of service lifecycle. Those would be potentially the 5 processes, and that would certainly be relevant to this conversation. Those processes are service strategy, service design, service transition, service operation, and then continuous service improvement. And that really actually kind of is the life cycle of a service, right? That's a logical flow for these things. And we do have an end-to-end service design process, and when I say service design, it's broader than just that, but it's an easy way to term it. And it is for the full life cycle from ideation to end of life for a service over its useful time. We have that built out as a process, and it actually has a model that flows it, and we're actually putting it into the platform in ServiceNow right now. We've got an engagement where we're driving that in for a client, so we're going to make it something that we bring out as a standard capability. But it also has, what's kind of cool about it, it has a It's really important to have governance in this process, and it has a UL-like or underwriter's laboratory-like lightweight governance veneer which says, hey, anyone out there in IT who wants to create a draft service, those of you in an area, if you know that, and that makes sense, right? You're the subject matter expert for that area. Draft a service, and we'll give you the tools and the tips to show you how to create that draft. And then once you've got it ready, you can submit it to us, and we'll review it, give you feedback on what improvements need to be made in an underwriter labs kind of approach, right? Very lightweight and very thin. And then once you make those corrections, we can publish that service to the enterprise catalog at that point, right? And so what's cool about it is not only do we have freedom to create at the level where the knowledge it exists, but we also get the governance we need to deliver enterprise consistency, because without that, the service catalog, if it's got a bunch of good and bad services in there together, the customers for the catalog won't like it, right? So we need to balance both those needs, and the approach we built does that.
Okay, great, thanks. Frank, if you're still on the line, let me know if Don answered your 5 or 6 process-related questions there. I've got another one. Jeff, I think I'm going to send this one to you. Are there ways to build the CMDB relationships automatically?
Yes. So, and Don hit on this a little bit in his slide. So I think certainly you can picture his slide that had the lower level infrastructure kind of CMDB versus the service level infrastructure or service level CMDB. Certainly the infrastructure side is a place where there's a lot of tools already there to support that, right? Either that be through things like ServiceNow's discovery, or even taking things like SolarWinds or other management tools that track kind of how things are interconnected from an infrastructure perspective. So that part's pretty, I think is pretty well established as far as some tools to use to build those relationships automatically. The service-to-service ones can be a bit more difficult, as Don alluded to, because sometimes if you think about it, right, if you're talking about, say, Workday has a dependency relationship on ServiceNow, or vice versa, you'd almost have to look into the code of the application to probe whether or not it's actually making interconnectivity connections between those two kind of services, right, which can be a little more tricky from an automation perspective.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Another one for you. If you had core services such as networking, would you have all service owners approve changes related to network changes?
So I think that this question is probably on when I demoed change management and the service owners approving it. I'd say, in the case of some core services, I'd probably say not necessarily, because I think, in an ideal world, from a letter of the law theory perspective, I think you want service owners to authorize kind of any change that impacts their service, but I think you certainly need to balance that with what's kind of practical. So, if you've got some kind of core service that has, some broad impact to upstream business services, like if it's a core router that impacts every service that you potentially provide, I'd probably lean more towards not requiring the service owners to authorize those changes, but maybe be, notified or alerted that that change occurs or is occurring that impacts their service.
Great, thanks. Jeff, let's see. In the demo, the outage record was created using a UI action. Wouldn't it be more common that the outage would be created through the event management application?
So short answer is yes. I would say from our experience, not all customers of ServiceNow have entitlements or licenses for the event management application, which is part of the ITOM suite. But that would likely be the most appropriate application to kind of collect alerts from your monitoring systems, kind of correlate them, and then ultimately create the incidents and outage records from those alerts. I would say for those, we do have customers that don't own event management, and for those customers, creating the incidents or outages is oftentimes done through direct integrations with some of those monitoring systems. And we've also seen cases where customers do things like what I showed, which is, having someone who's opening an incident kind of right-click on the header and say create an outage from this if it's known. So it's not like it's abnormal, but an ideal situation would be to have it funnel through some sort of automated detection of an event or an outage, right?
Super. If there are any last questions out there, I'm scrolling. I don't see any. So just a reminder, you will receive an email no later than tomorrow with a link to this recording and the slides. We do invite you to check our resources page on our website later today. We have 2 more webinars coming up this month, including one on customer service management, which is a new topic for us. So definitely check back evergreensys.com, go to resources, and check out the webinars. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you soon.